morning and welcome to your first induction task for Unit 1C, which is the Tudors. This is our breadth unit and the unit goes from 1485 to 1603. I'm Mrs. Quinn and I'm going to give you an overview of this task today and some background information about the Tudor period and what life was like in 1485. The Tudor topic is your first component of the exam part of the A-level. You have 3 questions that you'll have to answer in an exam in June 2022. The first question is an interpretation analysis of 3 different historians' views, and you'll be asked how convincing they are. You will compare the opinions within those interpretations to your own knowledge. And then you have 2 essay questions. You choose them from 3 options. This is 40% overall of the History A-level. So what will you learn on the Tudors course? Well, in Year 12, you will study the Tudors from September 2020 all the way through till Easter 2021. And we break from the exam units at Easter of Year 12 in order to teach the NEA, African American Civil Rights. Now, in Year 12, you will study Henry VII, the godfather of the Tudor dynasty. Now, he is less flamboyant than his son. However, he is a very skillful, talented politician, a prudent man who is able to secure and consolidate a dynasty from a very, very shaky claim to the throne. So he's very impressive as a monarch. His son is very, very well known. He's very notorious. Henry VIII is a fascinating period to study and a fascinating monarch to study because not only is he very capricious and very changeable, which makes his policy making fascinating, he's also ruling England in a period of enormous change, partly because England is becoming a Renaissance country and partly because of the wider changes in religion and also in intellectual thinking. And we'll look at Henry VIII, how his personality determines the course of English politics and religion by his death in 1547. Henry VIII's legacy leaves a very, very unstable situation. His successor, Edward VI, is a boy king and he dies within 6 years. Mary I overturns all of the religious reforms and turns England back into being a Catholic country. It's a great turbulence and also dies within 5 years. And as such, the successor is Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, and she ruled for the longest period, but very famously chooses not to marry and not to secure a continuation of the Tudor dynasty. Now, there's an enormous amount of change under Elizabeth I, not only in her style of rule and the use of government, but also in her innovative decision not to marry and to remain married to the state rather than to an individual, but also the great threat that she faced from Catholic Europe and in particular Philip II of Spain. Now, the Tudors unit is a breadth unit, and what that means is it's not a depth unit, so you don't need to know everything in every single minute piece of detail. You will need precise evidence, but really the key here is to be able to explain change over time. It's all about the themes, and you see the themes here. The top 2 questions are all about the powers of the monarchy and the effectiveness of government, and you will be able to compare different monarchs, different parliaments, how effective they were, and really how the style changed. There was a revolution of government in this period, and we'll study the extent to which that changed the way England was governed. We'll also look at succession and foreign powers and how the relationship with foreign powers changed. And we will look at the impact on the ordinary people of England. We will look at the impact on the economy and also on societal structures and how they changed. My favourite theme throughout this period is intellectual and religious ideas and how they begin to impact on thinking and policy making in the UK, most notably in the Reformation. And finally, how important was the role of key individuals and groups and how were they affected by developments? And that's another key theme. In order to understand this period, in a complex way, you really have to be able to explain what England was like in 1485. And it's important to bear in mind that England was a medieval society in this period. It's very much at the end of the Middle Ages. Things are slowly beginning to change, but it's more recognisable as a Middle Ages society than a Renaissance society. And the features are as such. England is predominantly an agricultural economy. Our biggest industry is the cloth trade, and we farm a lot of sheep. That is our biggest income in this period. We are a really small player on the world stage, and we are dwarfed in power by the French, the Spanish, and the Holy Roman Empire. Religion is highly dominant, and the religion is the Catholic Church. So we are ruled over by the Pope in Rome. A king's job in this period is to win battles. It's expected that the king will defend England and will try and secure territory from overseas. It's certainly not the king's job to try and make life better for the ordinary people. And we have a feudal system. That's how England is structured. And let's have a little look at what I mean by that. The feudal system, in simple terms, is a hierarchy. It's a way of structuring the power and how the power is distributed across English society. From 1066, the nobles swore loyalty to the monarch, and the power, very much in terms of land, in terms of military power, in terms of wealth, in terms of justice, and in terms of political power, is very much in those top two layers. At the bottom two layers is where the majority of the population exist. The peasants and the serfs are utterly dependent on their feudal overlords, the nobles. The nobles are the landowners, and they employ the peasants and the serfs to farm their land. The merchants, the farmers, and the craftsmen have more economic freedom and more skills. So there is an element of financial independence within this layer. The knights of the vassals have some power and some skill, but really the power exists at the top there. Now, the nobility are really fascinating because not only are they responsible for administering justice in their areas, they hold the titles, they're dukes and earls and marquesses, but also they have the power to raise armies for the monarch. The feudal system is intended to mirror the great chain of being, which is a spiritual hierarchy. The monarch, it was believed, was appointed by God, and this gives the monarch the divine right of kings. In theory, this means that no one else below the monarch in English society should challenge the authority of the king. The nobles and the magnates, who are the most powerful nobles, are relied upon by the monarch to keep law and order and to raise armies. The knights were often paid retainers by the nobles and could raise an army when needed from the peasants and the serfs. The commoners would obey, and this is why religion was such a useful tool for monarchs, because if they were religious and they believed that if they disobeyed God, they would go to hell, then disobeying the monarch is akin to disobeying God. So in theory, the commoners should always obey the monarch. There is over a 30-year period when the divine right of kings is questioned, and this period is known as the War of the Roses. You may have undertaken some research into this as part of your bridging task. If not, do not worry. We're going to give you a brief synopsis here. So here you have the Plantagenet dynasty and the Plantagenet king, Edward III. At the time, it was believed that women were too weak to rule. So the most important job of a king and also a queen was to give birth to lots of boys. You needed to have at least two, a male heir and a spare. And Edward III excelled in this task. He had 5 sons, and in theory, it looked as though he had secured his succession. In reality, Edward the Black Prince died before Edward III, and this created a sense of great competition between the remaining 4 brothers. Edward III made a disastrous decision upon his deathbed where he decided to defy the usual system of primogeniture, which essentially means all of your titles, your land, your money should go to the eldest son. And he defied that and shared his wealth equally between his other 4 sons. And this empowered each of these other sons to claim to be the successor, the rightful successor. And this creates a divide between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. The sons of John, Duke of Lancaster, went on to become Lancastrian kings: Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI, and eventually Henry Tudor, who becomes Henry VII. And then the sons of Edmund, the Duke of York, go on to become the Yorkist kings: Edward IV, Edward V, and Richard III. And in this 30-year period, you have real conflict known as the War of the Roses, because different sides of this family are fighting on the battlefield for the right to seize the throne. What this does is it eliminates many of the true claimants with strong links to the Plantagenet line. And actually, that creates an opportunity for Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor has a very weak claim to the Lancastrian line. Why is it weak? First of all, John Beaufort was actually an illegitimate son of John, Duke of Lancaster. Although he was legitimised after his birth, it was known that he had been an illegitimate son, and therefore his line should not have had the right to claim to the throne. The second reason Henry Tudor's claim is weak is because it's actually through his mother. It's a much stronger claim if it's through the paternal line and not the maternal line. Now, you have two sheets here, and they are overview sheets, really. So what I would like you to do is to print this sheet and the following sheet off and to have them in your new folders. You've got a little bit of a summary there of the course structure, of the content that you'll be learning in Year 12 and Year 13 on the Tudors course, the key questions which drive the thematic study of the course, and your assessment objectives. You can also make some notes there about the feudal system and English society in the 15th century. In addition, you also have the family tree of the Plantagenet dynasty, and if in the bridging task you were able to look at the causes of the War of the Roses and study that in a little bit of detail, then you can also populate the diagram at the bottom. If you haven't done that, don't worry. You can either just move straight on to the induction task today, or if you'd like a little bit of background, just look up a Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4 summary and briefly make some notes. Was incredibly unpopular. Task 4 is a challenge task and therefore non-compulsory. I would like you to analyse the extract from Shakespeare's Richard III. And finally, submit to our Tudors expert, Miss Jarvis, why was Richard III vulnerable by 1485? I want you to consider the internal and external threats, his policies, his mistakes, and the wider context of the Wars of the Roses more generally. If you haven't yet, please join either our Twitter or our Instagram accounts at Van Dyke History for lots of quizzes, lots of information about the history team, and lots of current affairs. So, for example, this week we're celebrating the 72nd anniversary of the introduction of the NHS. You've got the email address for Miss Jarvis. Please submit those tasks through to her. And if you've got any queries, you can contact her as well. Finally, once you've done all this, I would condense down what you've learned, top 10 facts, and that will help you with your revision later on. Good luck with everything, and we will see you next week.